Good afternoon, and I'm going to make sure that this is done pretty quickly for you guys. It's going to be a lot quicker because you guys can't ask questions, but also not only that, there's a few things, a few places in which I fully expect the audience to ask quite a bit of questions since they are also CPAs. So just bear with me. If you guys have any questions for me at all, just you have my number, so just ask. I mean, this stuff is fascinating to me, and I'm sure you guys will have some thoughts too. So I'm going to go ahead and get started as if this is the presentation. So, good afternoon. My name is Tristan Anderson. I'm a CPA working for Public Supermarkets. I'm a senior business analyst there. Before I go any further, I want to let you guys know that I, in no way, shape, or form, do my views represent Public's, and I am performing this presentation as basically a public service announcement. They represent my own views, my own research. Nothing of that I touch on a daily basis at work has anything to do with this. And so, with that in mind, let's go ahead and move on. The topic is digital currency. I want to get you guys, I'm going to start off with basically what we're going to do, types of currencies, how they all work, how they, how digital currencies in particular work, what the regulatory authorities have, what their thoughts are regarding this, and where we are headed in the future. So this is, I want you guys to keep this in mind because this will every single step will add more value and more information. So moving forward, we're going to go forward with the types of currencies. The types of currencies are two: fiat and digital. These are the two types of currencies that we're going to discuss today. Fiat currency is issued by a national central bank, only by a national central bank, by the way. This would be something like the Federal Reserve, Bank of China, etc. There's a central authority that issues it. While digital currencies can be issued by central banks, but they're primarily right now issued by private dealers and companies. Bitcoin, things like that. None of those in the ecosystem in their ecosystems are actually issued by a central governing authority. They're just issued by a company. So the backing is quite a bit different as well. Fiat currencies are backed only by faith and credit of the issuing central bank. Now, this goes back to Bretton Woods, where we told the world that we are going to move off the gold standard, and we said that because we were moving off the gold standard, we'll make sure that everybody in the world has to deal with this. And so we made a deal with the Arab nations, especially Saudi Arabia, to only deal in US dollars to make sure that everybody in the world could use it as a currency and they would know that there is something there to back it up. There are, as far as I know of, no currencies actually backed by anything tangible these days. They are all fiat currencies. Digital currencies are backed by many different ways. Some are actually backed by hard currencies, some are backed by nothing except the ether. It's kind of like a bank account when you look at it. They're not really backed by anything except what the bank has. Scratch that, I might take that out. Composition of these currencies. Fiat currencies are backed by they have both physical and digital components. You go to a bank account, you can deposit actual banknotes, Federal Reserve notes. In other countries, they're different things, and I always call Canadian money, I always call that monopoly money because it is actually plastic. Any currency above $1 is plastic. There's a funny story behind that. They actually had trouble with issuing it because of the fact that it would melt in people's pockets, and so until they got the actual composition of the plastic right, they ran into some issues. However, there's also a digital component as well. When you put that tangible currency into a bank, it basically becomes zeros and ones. The bank records it, and it exists merely as digital noise. While digital currency as well, by its very name, you can assume that it's entirely digital. There's nothing physical about digital currency at all. That'll be important to remember as we move forward and we start talking about the international ramifications of this as well. The access to it, fiat, there's actually no banks required. There's actually something to the effect of 1.2 billion people these days that do not actually have a bank account, that do not take out loans, and that operate completely bank free. While in a digital currency, you have to have access to a digital platform. And of course, the most popular digital platform is a cell phone. I will say that, for example, when I went to Haiti, not many people there even had homes, but what everybody there had, or seemingly had, everybody there had, was a cell phone. Do you call it strange? I do too, but that is an option in most countries these days. Now, the risk for a fiat currency is the credit risk of a nation. So, for example, the US was recently downgraded by Fitch to AA plus from AAA. What that means is that there is a negative outlook on the dollar between you and me. The dollar, we've been having some trouble with the fact that we are spending more than we are taking in via revenues, the IRS, etc. So our credit is at risk. The dollar is not as strong as it used to be. While digital currencies have absolutely no assurance of future value. So there's a big difference there. So national central banks, the credit risk of the entire nation is dependent on those central banks, and so that's where the risk is. While digital currencies have no theoretical backing, even in some cases, only the assurance that the company can provide. So we'll move into that further as we move forward. So how digital currencies work, they are managed and utilized through apps. They use encryption algorithms to verify transactions. So let me go through this first one. And just a heads up, I'm gonna have to go back and change this. This was meant to be entirely one at a time, but I'm gonna go through them as if they come up one at a time. So they're managed and utilized entirely through apps. So what this means is you have to have either a cell phone or a computer. You have to have some form of digital device to be able to access these currencies. Through that, you can make transactions. You can, transfer money to bank accounts, etc. They also use encryption algorithms to verify transactions. What this is cryptography. If you guys have never heard of cryptography, it's basically the method of making sure that things stay secure. It's like, for example, when you call somebody, there's with no encryption, anybody can really listen in and listen to talk to your friend or parents or whatever. When you use like for example, our military, when one general talks to another, they use encrypted, you know, communications, and what that means is that when you try to listen in, all you hear is noise. So it's the same type of thing here. Encryption is used to verify transactions. They use a network of systems, either centralized or decentralized, to run the algorithms, and this depends on what type of currency it is and how the model is set up, etc. Basically, it uses a number of computers to run the algorithms. So one of the big keys here is mining. If you've ever heard of crypto mining, all this means is that for non-central bank digital currencies, it users allow their computers to run the encryption algorithms to solve these transactions, so that, for example, when I go in and go, I want to buy this for 10 Bitcoin. Let's just say, for an example, you have to have a computer that processes this. What this means is that somebody who allows their system to be used to process this transaction and solve this encryption algorithm is given units of cryptocurrency as a reward for allowing this. So you say, your computer solves 10, processes 10 different transactions. It solves 10 of these different algorithms. As a reward for solving those 10 algorithms, you might get awarded a tenth of a Bitcoin or something like that. A small portion that actually basically is a reward mechanism for as a reward for you letting your system be used. So this can either be a centralized or decentralized system. There are entire companies that are actually built to run these mining operations so that they can build these powerful systems to beat everybody else else out to it so that they can get the most out of it. So that, for example, Joe Schmo on the side of the street is going to be beat out by this company because this company is running systems that are like 14 times more powerful or thousands of times more powerful than Joe Schmo is. And so they're, pounding these out, and they're, getting these Bitcoin, etc., through use of their machines. So it can be centralized or decentralized. Ledgers are both transparent and secure, meaning that everybody can look at the ledger and see that, oh, this transaction has occurred from this wallet to this wallet. However, the transactions are secure, which means that, you know, for example, nobody should, like North Korea, shouldn't be able to come in and take, your money out of your wallet because, you know, you just left it open. And finally, non-central bank digital currencies are essentially bartering in their usage. So according to pretty much all major organizations, you're basically saying, I accept this number of Bitcoin for, I'm going to keep using Bitcoin as an example because it's the most popular one. I'm going to accept Bitcoin in exchange for this. It's not legal tender. There's no set value. So therefore, it's basically barter. It's modern day barter. So the types of digital currency we have, I'm going to go into two specific types of cryptocurrencies. There's technically a couple more, but there's only two that are going to be relevant to our discussion today. And another example of one that we're not going to talk about are video game tokens. Obviously, we don't care about those, but they are a type of cryptocurrency. The two type of crypto we're going to talk about are stablecoin and other crypto assets. I lumped everything else into the one because it's such a broad. There's such a broad aspect to that. And then there's central bank digital currencies, and those are their own separate deal. So, talking about stablecoin, stablecoin is a type of crypto that is usually pegged to a recognized store of value. So, stablecoin is, it takes each unit of stablecoin and pegs it to a certain value. So, for example, stablecoin can be pegged to fiat currencies. There's tons of stablecoin that are pegged to the US dollar. There's stablecoins that are pegged to different commodities, some back to copper, etc. There's also other financial instruments that can be involved. Gold is another one. Oil is a popular one as well. Reserves are regularly audited and maintained by independent third-party custodians. So a lot of these places, a lot of these companies have independent third parties come in and to actually audit the books, to make sure that there's the actual holdings available. Now, one thing to note about this is that according to the PCAOB, as the public company is auditing oversight board for you, mom and dad, or Aaron, or whoever, basically the organization that the government entity that oversees all public accounting, according to them, audits provide no meaningful assurance to investors or the public regarding internal controls, governance, or going concern. So basically what this means is that there's no real assurance that the entity has that store of value that is adequate for the peg. And furthermore, there's absolutely no assurance that the internal controls exist in the company to assure that that stays that way. And also, the going concern is an accounting term basically used to describe, are we going to exist in the future? Like, for example, are we going to have to go through bankruptcy because we actually don't have anything? Or the things that we have backing it up go kaput? Like, for example, let's say, I have a stable coin back to the US dollar. Well, if that US dollar becomes Zimbabwe dollars for example, if we like decide as a country, oh, we're going to print, $40 trillion this next year, obviously the dollar is going to be worthless. So even though you're pegged to the dollar, the stable coin's value goes the way of the dollar, and so it just disappears. So the purpose of a stable coin is in its name. It's to provide a stable value. Basically, $1 in means $1 out. Whatever I put in, I will get back out. For businesses, this is the golden standard. You want as much stability as possible. And for people, you want that stability as well because you don't want to put a dollar in and get 50 cents back, right? Now, it's important to remember that stablecoins are not legal tender. So, although stablecoins seem like a good idea, they are not legal tender. You cannot use them to pay your debts to any country, at least at this point. And remember everything else that these pegs, there's no real assurance as far as auditing is concerned. So let's talk about collateralization. So most collateralization of stablecoins are use the US dollar. Some use gold or oil, but basically that collateralization is to be sure that when you put that dollar in, even if we go belly up, we can always get that dollar back to you. Examples of this are Tether and TrueUSD. These I know TrueUSD uses the US dollar as a collateral. Tether, I believe, uses US dollars as well. So some of these actually use other cryptocurrencies as a collateral. Now, since crypto can be volatile, it's usually over collateralized. For an example of this is DAI stablecoin. They use the US dollar and it's pegged to the US dollar. It's backed by crypto, but it has over 150% of its value collateralized in crypto. So they can be sure that like for example, if they're collateralized in Bitcoin, they can make sure that if Bitcoin tanks, they have enough in there to fulfill their obligation. So you're still getting that $1 back. Now there's also algorithmic collateralization. Now what this is it's like a fiat currency in that it doesn't rely on anything tangible to collateralize it, which means that in a crisis, its value can plummet with no way to ensure its peg. An example of this was Terra USD. They actually got down to about 30 cents a coin, 30 cents for each unit. That's what its worth was. So it plunged in no time. People just had absolutely no confidence in it, and that just ruined it. So there, with algorithmic stablecoins, you have absolutely no assurance of value since there's actually not backed by anything tangible. Now, the good thing about gold and oil backed entities or stablecoins, obviously, if they're backed by that gold and oil, you're going to be able to get that dollar back. However, again, you go back to auditing principles. Is that enough? Is that enough assurance that they actually have it, or is it like in paper or something like that? So let's look at crypto itself, other cryptocurrencies. So this is like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. Most other cryptocurrencies operates in more of a market-driven manner. The value is determined based off of supply and demand. So the value of one Bitcoin is based off of how many people are willing to buy that Bitcoin. So of course it's like the market. You put in your bid and somebody outbids you, so it gets sold to them. And so it's operated entirely off of supply and demand. It's usually extremely decentralized. So, like for example, Bitcoin is based off of private miners. So while this can be, big companies and the like, it's usually tons of smaller single people that actually perform this. It can be extraordinarily volatile in value. For an example, let's look at Bitcoin here. In the span of a couple months, you have Bitcoin going from less than $30,000 in value all the way up to over $60,000, and then within a month plummeting down to around $37,000 again. So obviously, there's an extraordinary volatility in crypto because of that supply and demand market aspect. The most prominent examples are Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I use those at the beginning for that reason. And that's why I've been using them throughout this whole thing. So we're going to move on to central bank digital currencies. So central bank digital currencies are similar to both fiat currencies and stablecoins in operation and function. They're controlled entirely by a nation's central bank. So this goes back to the beginning with a fiat currency. The central bank controls the entire thing. They can inject and remove as they will. The value of the digital currency is based entirely on typical fiat principles. So basically the money supply versus the velocity of money. for you, mom and dad, this will basically be how much money we have and how often that money is changing hands will determine the value of that money. So, for example, if we inject $10 trillion and we already have $10 trillion in there, so we double it, it doesn't really affect inflation until we start spending that $10 trillion. So if I inject it and nobody spends anything, then the value stays the same. However, if I inject it and all of a sudden we start spending it all, that and that money starts changing hands, and the inflation goes skyrocketing. So unlike traditional fiat currencies, it is completely digital. There's no physical currency whatsoever. So you can't get that Canadian funny money or the Federal Reserve notes that we have now, as you see on the picture. It's entirely ones and zeros, and the location of those ones and zeros can depend on a few things. We'll see those moving forward. So central bank digital currency ledger type. There are centralized ledgers where all transactions flow through the central bank directly. And there are intermediaries. These are the financial institutions, payment platforms that manage and transfer liabilities. So these would be like, for example, your Banks of America, your Bank of Americas, your PayPal's, all these companies and banks that, you know, operate in this field of transactions. They're the ones that actually operate the centralized ledger. They're the ones that actually manage and transfer liabilities. They're the ones that make the loans, and they're the ones that actually let you pay. This enhances, set by centralizing a ledger, a central bank can enhance its security, improves the monitoring and interaction with other government entities. This would be like, for example, say we have a Fed coin. Well, the IRS can tap into that and see exactly what's gone where, so they can even tell you exactly what you owe in taxes instead of having to go through different people to figure it out. The IRS can have all that information already. It also enhances anti-fraud measures. So this would be, oh, we can go through the whole FTX thing here, but I'm going to cover that at a later date. But basically, it ensures the fidelity of the system, that fraud does not run rampant because you can shut it down pretty quickly. There's also decentralized ledgers. Now these are distributed. This is where all transactions are distributed through numerous intermediaries. So instead of the central bank having the one ledger, centralized ledgers, the central bank actually controls where all the ones and zeros are stored, where your money is stored. The decentralized ledgers means that each bank or each PayPal will actually have on file where everything is located, who owns what. So while centralized ledgers, everything is located within the central bank, decentralized ledgers, basically everything operates as normal as you would normally see now, except through banks and the like. It enhances peer-to-peer and offline payments. So for example, I can go up to my phone and pop it on to a payment system, and it goes. It's like the Google Pay or the Apple Pay. The government oversight is not as direct. The government takes a backseat here to functionality. Basically, it functions as the monetary system functions as it normally does, except it's just all digital now. While in a centralized ledger, everything's actually the central bank is the central bank. So let's talk about distribution. Wholesale, there's a difference between wholesale and retail central bank digital currencies. Wholesale central bank currencies are designed to be used for financial and governmental institutions. So facilitates high value, secure transactions between large institutions in real time. This isn't for your mom and pop. I'm going to go spend $20 at the grocery store. This is your, Bank of America. I need to transfer $500,000 for the sale of this. Or, the Department of the Treasury, I need to send $100 million in stimulus payments out. That is what this is for, exclusively. It is interoperable between the various national currencies. So, say for example, Bank of China wants to make a payment to the U.S. Treasury for purchase of U.S. Treasury bonds. Well, the wholesale of CBDC would actually be able to affect that immediately. It offers greater market functionality with vastly superior settlement times and trading. You're not having to wait, however long it takes for the payments to settle, but instead you're getting this instantly within seconds. So, right now, let's say, for example, you want to buy a home. Well, let's say you want to send $1,000 bank to bank to somebody. Well, that's going to take quite a bit of time to do normally. However, with a wholesale CBDC, you can do that instantly. There's no verification period because the verification is instant through this encrypted transaction. I will note that the IMF and Bank of International Settlements have begun development on platforms for international transfers. So they're actually working right now to affect these. And they're running pilots and all that as well too. Retail CBDCs are meant to be used by the general public. So this is you and I going back and forth. Like I'm going to say, I want to buy, I want to buy your phone off of you for $20. Well, with a retail central bank digital currency, I can do that. With a wholesale, I can't because it's not bank to bank. Retail, this is go to the grocery store and buy, your groceries for the week. This is, pay your phone bill. This is everything you do. It facilitates large volumes of smaller transactions. So instead of, these high value, I'm going to buy $40 million in central bank bonds, this is, I'm going to go to the grocery store and buy my Coke for the day. It allows greater accessibility to financing in the broader economy for the unbanked. So remember at the beginning where I said there was about 1.2 billion people who were unbanked who did not have a bank account? Well, this would mean that all of them would have access to the digital currency. They'd have to have a bank account in order to participate in the economy. So let's talk about this important aspect. This important aspect will come heavily this important aspect will be factored into where I think we're going next. This will be the next session. Programmability of a CBDC. The definition. So I pulled this directly out of the EU's Data Protection Supervisor Handbook. Basically, here's the exact quote. Programmable money consists of a CBDC with built-in rules imposing restrictions on the usage of that money. So, what this means is that the central bank can tell you how that money can be spent. Now, why would this be important? You see how I have the daily rate, have rations up on here. Well, a government can then define a positive or negative interest rate. So, say government wants to, and we'll get into this more in the next one. I'm going to leave this one in particular for the next one, but basically, you can put an interest rate on money to encourage or discourage spending. A government can issue stimulus payments that can only be used in certain goods or services. So, say for example, and this can even go for example, food stamps. Say you want to issue food stamps. Well, now you can say you can only spend this on food. This specific money set here. You can have, however much you want inside the bank account, but this money in particular can only be spent on that in perpetuity. The government can also set an expiration date for such certain currencies. So this would be like, I'm going to issue $100 in stimulus to everybody. You have to spend it in 30 days because we need the economy to get going. Well, this will be possible with a programmable currency. We'll discuss this a lot more in the next session because this will really guide my thoughts as to where we're headed and the central banks as to why they're taking the steps they are. But keep this in mind moving forward. This is going to be important. So let's move from there, from basic background on everything, into where we're headed now, or to what the current regulatory landscape is. So the IRS and digital currencies. So notice 2014-21 was issued in obviously 2014, it clarified what the IRS thinks of digital currencies. They call them virtual currencies in the notice, by the way, and in moving forward they do that as well. Digital currencies are considered to be property, not currency, for tax practices. This means that the basis must be calculated at acquisition according to its fair market value whenever a transaction occurs. So let's say I buy 5 Bitcoin at $5, and in 15 years, it's up to $30. Well, guess what? That's $25. But it's only recognized when it's either held for gains and losses upon transfer or sale are capital gains and losses unless the asset is held for sale or trade in the ordinary course of business. So for most people, it's basically like a stock. You buy it for a certain amount and you sell it for, more or less. You recognize that as a capital gain or loss. Like, for example, my in-laws just sold my grandparents' home. It's a capital gain for her because it appreciated in value. And so that tax is owed when the transfer happened. And so that tax is a capital gain or loss at that lower rate. However, if you use it in the ordinary course of business, like say, for example, I'm Coinbase or someone like that, or I am a broker that specializes in this, then guess what? It's ordinary income. So it's the same thing with stocks. If you're buying or selling stocks, and as like, for example, a hedge fund would in the ordinary course of business, then it's ordinary gain or loss. So remember this, receiving crypto for mining is considered income. So for all of you guys who have people and who have clients and they say, oh yeah, they mention at any point I mine crypto. Well, guess what? That crypto that's mined is considered income. They have to declare that to the IRS. Any payments in 1 year to contractors that add up to $600 or more requires a 1099 miss to be issued. So, for example, if you pay your contract, a good example of this is in the NFL. There's a player that actually accepts his salary only in crypto. I believe it's Bitcoin in particular. That would require a 1099 miss to be issued, especially for him because he's obviously receiving more than $600 in income. And all digital currency related income must be reported on the taxpayer's 1040. So that was what was issued in 2014. This is why I'm so glad I did this presentation now, because guess what? The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 updated some definitions, and this applies specifically to the IRS and tax law. The law defines digital asset, and I'm going to call this the Jobs Act, basically, or the Infrastructure Act. The law defines digital asset brokers any person who, for consideration for mom and dad, that means for any sum of money, is responsible for any, like if you make a transaction and anything at all tangible is traded, that's consideration. It defines digital asset broker as any person who, for consideration, is responsible for regularly providing any service effectuating transfers of digital assets on behalf of another person. So basically, a digital asset broker is anybody who puts forth any transaction whatsoever for digital assets, who regularly does this. So for example, and this is important because this requires brokers are required to report additional things. Virtually all wallets, no pun intended, would be included in this definition. So this would include, any digital wallet like Coinbase, etc., that affects digital transactions. They would all of a sudden be a digital asset broker who would have to report to the IRS. So based on this, the IRS has proposed regulations. And now let me tell you this, before we go any further, these proposed regulations cancel that. I'm just going to say the proposed regulations are the implementation of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. They update sections 1001, 1012, and 6045 to apply the new definition of digital asset broker. This applies to all transactions that occur on or after January 1st, 2025. Basically, 2025, the tax year 2025. It codifies the new definition of broker. Brokers will be required to report gross proceeds on Form 1099 DA, obviously digital asset. A new form, by the way. So, gross proceeds meaning anything that you get or sell, anything that comes through your system, you're going to have to report. Real estate purchasers will have to report the fair market value of any digital assets used in the purchase of real estate. So, say for example, you buy a home for 10,000 Bitcoin or whatever it's worth now. You'll have to report that as well. Any transaction involving digital assets for goods, involving the transaction between digital assets and goods and services. So, like for example, say you buy a home with, say you buy a car with Bitcoin. It'll be treated as reportable under Section 6050W. In short, brokers will have to report digital currency transactions to the IRS. Any questions? And this is where I would ask for questions, obviously. So, moving forward. And let me tell you guys right now, I fully expect that programmability section to go quite a bit over. So while this section is less than the 50 minutes, I fully expect there to be a number of questions that will bring this to the 50 minutes. Or even higher. So the current regulatory environment. We're going to look at the FASB and digital currencies, and we're going to look at... So let's look at, in particular, at the FASB. The FASB has said that... So starting off with its background, there's an AICPA guide that treats crypto as an intangible asset like trademarks, etc. Which is fine and all. However, there are certain things about digital currencies that make them different than trademarks. One of those things being that digital currencies can be used in everyday transactions, while intangible assets like trademarks, patents, and all that generally are not. So, gains on held assets. So let's go back to this. Gains on held assets are not recorded, but assets can be impaired when the value falls. So if you harken back to that graph of Bitcoin, say you got that Bitcoin that in January for $37,000 or $30,000 or less, and it went up to $65,000. Well, you got nothing out of that. However, when if it drops back below, you have to impair it now. Obviously, there's a lot of things there that are not good. There are a lot of things there that are faulty about that. For example, if you have 10,000 Bitcoin that you bought for $5 and all of a sudden they're worth $60,000, that changes your financial position by quite a bit. So because of this, because digital currencies are quite a bit different, the FASB issued an ASU, and that, for you mom and dad, that's an accounting standards update on March 23rd, 2023. They proposed an update to the accounting standards. What this update, now, this is another funny part, that IRS section, by the way, public comment ended on the 30th, so today, for you and me, Mom. For everybody else, it's going to be a couple days ago, and the public hearing is going to be next week on the 7th. So this is incredibly timely. The FASB issued this proposed update on March 23rd, and guess what? Last month now, for us, 2 months ago, the board concluded its comment period and directed staff to draft the final ASU on September 6th. Now, by the way, the FASB is the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which makes all the accounting rules. For example, if you ever hear about the Accounting Standards Codification or generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, that's this. That's these people. So this is incredibly timely because, as far as I know of, they haven't actually issued the final ASU yet. So we're in that period between the final draft and what we know now. So this accounting standards update would come into effect for all companies for fiscal years starting after December 15th of 2024. So basically following along the same lines as the IRS, January 1st, 2025. Here we have December 15th, 2024. Basically, we're going to be talking about the same period of time that these are going to be starting. The focus is incredibly narrow. It doesn't include NFTs, especially blockchain. Which is especially blockchain digital representation unique items. So this would be songs, and various artwork like that, or stable coins. And the reasoning here is because NFTs are essentially an intangible asset, so the intangible asset rules are perfectly applicable to them. It goes up and down in value based off of what the item is worth, not exact, like a work of art. And stable coins are meant to be $1 in, $1 out. So unless you have a situation like, for example, like I said with the that one stable coin where they lost 30% of its value or 70% of its value in one day, generally speaking, you're going to have that same value throughout, so you can stick with the intangible assets. Now, I will say the Big Four wanted those to be included as well in these, but I agree with FASB on this, in which, obviously digital currencies, crypto has a completely different functionality than stable coins or NFTs. So I can see where they went with this. So let's talk about that proposed update. The proposed update, the definition of the scope. The scope of it, there are several things that are important to remember with this. Everything that is encompassed in this new subtopic that they're creating, which is subtopic 350-60, have to meet these certain pieces, these certain definitions. They must meet the definition of intangible assets as defined in the codification. So this is defined elsewhere in the codification. Basically, they have to be intangible, digital. They do not provide the asset holder with enforceable rights to or claims on underlying goods, services, or other assets. So this would be another thing why this would be, like, for example, stocks or futures. Futures contracts provide you with enforceable rights to an actual tangible asset. So digital currencies, crypto, in particular, say Bitcoin, there's nothing behind it. So that if you buy one Bitcoin, you do not have the right to whatever value of that at any point in time in the future. This is just specifically you're buying one Bitcoin and you're riding with that value. You may get more or less in the future. It also means that it's not a contract. Now, this is important too because this goes back to wholesale CBDCs as well, and we'll get to that coming up. But there is a reason why that's delineated here too. It applies to the digital currencies that are created or reside on a distributed ledger based on blockchain technology. So it has to involve cryptography, which is what we talked about in the future. You have to use an encryption algorithm. They're secured through cryptography. Here you go. Those two are kind of one and the same, but it's based on a distributed ledger. And they're fungible. So if I buy one Bitcoin, that is the same as somebody else buying a different Bitcoin. Those two Bitcoin are the same. So this is going back up this is why NFTs are not included, because NFTs are not fungible. They're separate. They're different things. So because they're fungible, I can buy 1 Bitcoin and I can trade 1 Bitcoin with somebody else, and we basically traded nothing. We got $0 back and forth because they're the same thing. And they're not the other one is that they are not created or issued by the reporting entity or its related party. So if I am, say for example, I am, Joe Schmo CPA, or say for example, let's go with Walmart here. So I'm gonna rethink this. So say I'm a major retailer. I do not create or issue Bitcoin. So this would fall within the scope. If I have Bitcoin, this would fall within the scope. However, if I am the manufacturer of Bitcoin, I cannot report this. So this would not apply to me. I cannot report on Bitcoin. So, as the creator of Bitcoin. So, going further, let's talk about how we measure the value of these. So the value measurement is going to be fair market value. Now, this is the difference here between this and before is that they must be measured at the fair market value at each reporting period and upon acquisition and disposal. Why do we have to record the fair market value at acquisition and disposal and the value at each reporting period? Well, that goes forward to the required disclosures at each reporting period. These required disclosures are the name of, and this is on the end of your financial statements, the financial notes. You have to record the name of each crypto asset held. So if I hold Bitcoin and Ethereum, I have to say that I hold each Bitcoin and Ethereum separately. You also have to disclose the cost basis for each crypto asset. So here you go, acquisition and disposal. I bought 50 Bitcoin at $5. You have to record that. And I bought 10 Ethereum at $1. You have to record that too. You have to disclose the fair value of each crypto asset at the reporting date. So let's say I bought the Bitcoin at $5. Well, now it's worth $30. I have to report that it's now worth $30 each. Also, the Ethereum went from $1 to 50 cents. So I have to report that as well. Also, you have to report the number of units held in each crypto asset. So I have to report that I hold 10 Bitcoin. I bought them for $5 each. They're now worth $30. I bought 10 Ethereum at $1 and then are worth 50 cents. So you have to report each one of these in your financial notes, which basically gives you an idea of how the company operates with it and how they're doing with these digital currencies. Are they buying them as more of a hedge? Are they buying them to create additional value? And how are they doing with that? Like if I'm buying, if I bought those Bitcoin at $65,000 each and now they're worth $30,000, I'm going to look at it as an investor and go like, if they're making these decisions now, do I really want to do business with them in the future? It adds value to the financial statements. And before, where you could only record, and it adds value also in that before, where you were only getting, oh, I bought it and now it's worth less, but I can't tell you that I actually made money on it. Now you're getting an accurate visual of how it's working. And it's also moving us more towards that fair value framework where we're looking at fair market value for most things in convergence with IFRS. The presentation for crypto assets received as consideration in the ordinary course of business and converting nearly immediately into cash. The cash received is classified as an operating activity for cash flows. So if you get cash, if you get crypto and it's turned into cash immediately, it's an operating activity. So say for example you're a real estate company and you have sold a piece of real estate for $1 million. You sold it for Bitcoin. Well, you're not going to hold on, and if you don't hold on to that Bitcoin, If your entire intent is to sell it and you sell it within a couple days, well, then you would record that as cash in your cash flow statement. Now, you must also annually provide a reconciliation of opening and closing balances of crypto assets. So that goes back up to the required disclosures. Not only required to disclose all of that stuff, how much crypto you have, what you bought it for, what it's worth now, and how much you have in it. You also have to reconcile the opening and closing balance of that on a year-to-year basis. Now let's take a look at the SEC. Here's where I want to talk about FTX and Silicon Valley Bank. So we all remember what happened with those. FTX basically got, it's not a laughing matter to anybody involved, but basically they got caught with absolutely no controls over anything, and they basically ended up using their crypto platform as a Ponzi scheme and stole hundreds of millions of dollars from investors. And of course, with the fallout from this, you had Silicon Valley Bank, which is heavy in these various things, especially with these tech startups. They collapsed, and with them, First Republic collapsed, and a few other banks collapsed as well. With those collapses, the SEC has stepped up enforcement actions against other crypto exchanges as well. I want to talk about here's the filed lawsuits against Binance and Coinbase. Basically, what they're trying to prove in court is that they've acted unlawfully by not registering as securities exchanges. And you're going to see this throughout these next few things that I'm going to say. They're saying that they're not securities exchanges because they're saying that crypto are securities. Basically, they're stocks or bonds. And because they're stocks or bonds, they need to be registered with the SEC in order to trade stocks and bonds. After all, it would follow the purview of the Securities Exchange Commission if they're not securities. So they continually argue in court that crypto assets are securities. Obviously, like we just said. In Grayscale Investments LLC versus SEC, this is a court case that's still ongoing with the appeals. The SEC argued that Grayscale's Bitcoin Futures Trust could not become an ETF. The court denied this, and the SEC was ordered to allow Grayscale to create its ETF because it's not based off of Bitcoin futures. An ETF is an exchange-traded fund. In SEC versus Ripple Labs et al., so basically multiple companies, the SEC argued that the crypto in focus is itself a security. So they argued that because crypto is being exchanged, the crypto itself is a security, and because of that, anybody who trades in crypto must be registered as an exchange. Like, for example, and this is talking about the New York Stock Exchange, etc. Those are those are registered as legal stock exchanges with the SEC. Well, the SEC is arguing that crypto is in and of itself a security. It was partially denied. The court partially denied it in that it wasn't a security when sold to the public, so on an exchange. So, if I go buy, 5 Bitcoin, that's not a security. However, the court ruled that it's a security when it's sold to institutional investors. So this would be like Bank of America and companies like this that buy, millions of dollars at one time. So where are we headed with all this? And this I'm going to take a bigger look at. I'm looking at where the SEC is headed, how it's been defined by all these different organizations, and I'm going to pull out some Nostradamus here because honestly, this is mainly guesswork, but we can read in the tea leaves where we're kind of headed. President Biden issued an executive order on March 9th, 2022. The executive order ordered the Treasury, Attorney General, Department of Homeland Security, and other agencies to report on the future of money and payment systems. Now, this, in particular, I'm going to wait to put this next one forward. This in particular was especially surprising because they also ordered. This went from everything from the SEC. This also included the SEC, but additionally, insurance, banking, etc. So virtually every agency was told to report on the future of money. This culminated in a 12-week CBDC pilot program run by the Federal Reserve. They coordinated payments with several systematically important financial institutions. Remember, these systemically important financial institutions are basically too big to fail. We learned this during TARP. This would be, again, your Bank of Americas, your Citibanks. These banks are way too big for the government to let fail. Otherwise, a systemic collapse would occur. Note that there is recent announcements on a FedNow program. It is not a CBDC. What FedNow is it's basically like a payment settlement system. A lot of countries already have this. This was mainly for interbank transfers and things of that nature. The focus was not on actual currency, but the focus was on taking our archaic payment system and bringing it up to date. So FedNow is not a CBDC. So you can get that off your chest. Take a deep breath. We're good. That is not a CBDC. It is just a payments processing system, essentially. Now, here's where we are headed. Before we go any further, I want to talk about the Fed's mission, because once we see the Fed's mission, we'll get everything in focus, and we'll be able to more fully digest why they would be heading in this direction. The Fed's mission, according to the Fed itself, as you can see the link down there below, I got this from the Fed. Their mission is fivefold. They conduct the nation's monetary policy to promote maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates in the U.S. economy. So basically what this means is that they try to keep as many people with jobs that want jobs. They try to keep inflation down. That's why you see them raise the interest rates repeatedly, because they want to see prices come back down. So that's their way of removing money from the system. They promote the stability of the financial system and seek to minimize and contain systemic risks through active monitoring and engagement in the U.S. and abroad. This would be like, for example, too big to fail. They want to contain systemic risk. Remember Bear Stearns fail? They considered that to be a systemic risk. And so, and more recently, actually, this is why they've been running stress tests. They've been running stress tests to say, what in a crisis, what will happen to each institution. Their goal is to make sure that each institution can survive, that no one institution can bring down the system. It's to promote the safety and soundness of individual financial institutions and monitors their impact on the financial system as a whole. This goes back to the prior point, what I just said there. Fosters payment and settlement system safety and efficiency through services to the banking industry and the U.S. government that facilitate U.S. dollar transactions and payment. This goes back to FedNow. This is why FedNow was created. It's because they wanted to create sound transactional fluidity. They wanted banks and other people to be able to settle payments relatively quickly. Also, their mission is to promote consumer protection and community development through consumer-focused supervision and examination, research and analysis of emerging consumer issues and trends, community economic development activities, and the administration of consumer laws and regulations. Basically, they want to enforce consumer laws and make sure that the country grows. So this would be stimulus payments and the things of that nature. Now here's where we are headed. I don't see Let's talk about crypto's popularity. Crypto's popularity came because they're generally secure. Your everyday hacker generally can't get into, the ledger and steal money from people. They're private, but they're also transparent at the same time. This is you can see the ledger, you can see what's going on, but you can't actually see who's doing what on the ledger. You can see transactions are occurring, you can see where the transactions are occurring, but you can't see that who is conducting those transactions. Now, remember, crypto is not related to the government, so that's a big plus for people. It has limited oversight, so the IRS isn't going to be able to come in and go, ha ha ha, I see you have $1 million in crypto, give it to us now. And there's no link to someone's identity. Basically, you can't link, you can't say, hey, you know, Tristan Anderson here has, $1 million in crypto. Also, an interesting point here is that that going back to the whole Bitcoin thing, Bitcoin became incredibly popular because people made a ton of money on it. You had people that went from, owning a bunch of crypto, a bunch of Bitcoin for $5. They bought it for $5, and it was now worth $60,000 each. There's a point in time where I looked at crypto and I was like, you know, I could have actually bought a Bitcoin for $5. If I'd have bought that Bitcoin for $5, I'd have a lot more money now. Also, it makes transactions a lot easier. You can buy Bitcoin, like for example, Tesla has and SpaceX have said they will accept crypto. Elon's gone out and basically pumped the popularity of crypto by saying he'll take it. It's a lot easier to deal with. Everything's on your phone. You don't have to have tangible currency. You don't have to go through the banking system, which can be incredibly slow. You don't have to send money and hope it gets there one day. Like for example, when I send money to my parents, I can pay a ton of money through Western Union or send it through the bank. Well, the bank can take a long time to send it to someone. This just means I can go pop it off. It's like, Venmo. You can Venmo somebody instantly. The same type of thing. These payment apps are a more recent thing, but when crypto came out, that made that type of thing a lot easier. However, there are a lot of issues with crypto. And these issues are the reason why I don't see crypto being where I think why central banks are moving away from crypto. It has a large energy footprint, and Dara will be able to tell you soon why that's important to central banks as well. For example, Cambridge estimates that Bitcoin consumes more electricity than the country of Sweden. In 1 year, more energy is used to conduct Bitcoin transactions than the entire country of Sweden uses. Actually, I was going to use Ukraine as an example. Before the war started, Ukraine energy output was less than what Bitcoin consumes in 1 year. Just think about how big that is. That's a serious problem if Bitcoin alone consumes more energy than an entire nation. That's going to cause a big strain on the power grid, but it's also going to create fossil fuel, climate change, green greenhouse gases. Ooh, here we go. It's also used for a number of illicit purposes, including funding terrorism. This is a pretty big thing that's especially important now, where that we see this whole Israel and Hamas thing. Again, the timeliness of this is huge because it's well known that a number of countries, for example, North Korea and Iran, fund a lot of these terrorist groups through crypto because it's hard to find and it's hard to stop. It's vulnerable to fraud and manipulation. You have pump and dump schemes that go on quite regularly, and since it's not an exchange, you can't really stop it. While those types of things are regulated by the SEC as far as stocks are concerned, there's nothing governing somebody from doing that with Bitcoin. For somebody releasing, like for example, a terrible headline and buying up a bunch of Bitcoin, or the opposite, buying up a bitch, selling a bunch of Bitcoin and then saying saying, oh, something great's going to happen, Bitcoin goes up, and then you just sell all your stock, sell all your Bitcoin. There's nothing to stop that, actually. So these large institutions can do that whenever they want, because there's no real there's nothing really stopping them. There was that Ripple case that where the court kind of said that they can't do that, but there's nothing stopping ultra wealthy people from doing that even still. The collapse of FTX was a big example of this. That collapse was due entirely to basically a Ponzi scheme, it being a Ponzi scheme. Because of that fraud there, tons of people lost money, but not only that, but entire banks collapsed. So I have to remember I put those in there too. So it's also vulnerable to hacking. I don't know if you can see down here, but I have there is a recent story run by NBC that actually said that North Korea hackers have actually funded their nuclear program through through hacking of these digital wallets. So although cryptography is used to secure it, well, guess what? Unfortunately, since you don't have a state backing it, and since you don't have a state encrypting it, it's still easier to get into and still easier to hack than it would be a state. Stablecoins as well, you may think, oh, well, why not stablecoins? Well, stablecoins are vulnerable to manipulation, can be devalued rapidly, as we also saw. It went to 30 cents on the dollar in less than a day. And that happens for a number of stablecoins too. No matter what they're backed by, you have no assurance that they're actually backed by that, or that what they're backed by will be worth anything in the next day. So both the IMF and BIS are working on cross-border payment settlement platforms. What that tells me is that both the IMF and BIS are looking for CBDCs that become the next big thing. What them working on cross-border payment platforms means is that it'll enhance the interoperability of CBDCs across the world. So you can go from China and use your Fed coin there. I'm going to call it Fed coin. You can use your digital dollar there. You can come from China and use your digital yuan here. That'll really make international transactions that much easier. You won't have to worry about the exchange rate because it'll be determined instantaneously on their payment platforms. It'll allow for better effective monetary policy. So this here comes back to what we were talking about before with programmability. So a CBDC means that the Fed will be able to control rates and monitor the money supply and inflation in real time. So the CPI got up to almost 10%, and PPI got up to well over 10%. PPI is, production. Basically, it's what it costs to buy the intermediate products and what it costs to actually produce things. And CPI is Consumer Price Index, so it's that basket of items where it determines the cost based off of what's bought and sold and what they're bought and sold for. So the Fed will be able to control rates and more effectively and be able to control inflation into the way they want it to go. So you can put an instantaneous, I'm going to say everything is going to cost 1%. For the longer everything, inflation's way too high, we have to stop this, so money's going to cost a lot more. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, the rates go into effect instantly. There is no lag. Right now, there's a lag effect for the Fed's rate increases to actually affect the broader economy because it takes a while for those rate increases to trickle on through. Well, this would be almost instantaneous. And they can also add and remove money in real time as well. So they can just scrape zeros off the top, period. Also, funds can be injected and removed to better affect the government's objectives relatively easily. So say, for example, remember COVID? The economy almost entirely shut down and everything tanked. Well, guess what? those $1,000 stimulus payments, they could just put right into your account, especially if it's a centralized ledger. Boom, all of a sudden, you have money there. And unlike the COVID stimulus where we injected all that money and guess what? People just sat on it, put it into their savings because you don't know when you're going to need it. The Fed can put it in and go, look, the government can put into law, look, we're going to inject $1,000 into everybody's account and it has to be spent in 30 days. We need to get this economy going. Well, they can put a timestamp on that. Here's your $1,000. If you don't spend it in 30 days, it disappears out of your account. So it's either you use it or lose it. So you can encourage spending and discourage spending at the same time. You can also put like you can discourage spending by making it cost more to spend the rate increases. And so programmability also allows for the disruption of criminal activities in near real time. So you talk about sanctions, removing Russia from SWIFT. Well, if you have a CBDC, that's gone instantly. There's no, we have to take the time to go through and do this. It's done. As soon as you find a criminal activity and you can stop it in process. The ECB has already allowed for the program, and this is not just an idle statement here too, but the ECB itself has already allowed for the programmability of payments in smart contracts. Smart contracts automatically initiate payments once certain conditions are met. So say, for example, you had a hedge contract out there or an interest rate swap or something like that. Once a certain condition is met, it automatically affects the contract. So programmable currency can allow for effective enactment of government policies as well, as we've just seen. So instead of the Fed wanting to control rates, if Congress wants to pass stimulus, they can do that. If they want to raise taxes, they can do that, and there's nothing that'll be much easier to affect and much more streamlined instead of what we see now. So, another reason why I say this is where we're headed is because the stats say it all. According to the Atlantic Council's CBDC tracker, 130 countries representing 90% of global GDP are exploring a CBDC, in various stages, of course. 19 of the G20 countries are now in the advanced stage of CBDC development. The Fed has already piloted a CBDC. The ECB is actually taking comments from different countries on what they want to see in a CBDC. They're working on a wholesale CBDC right now, and it's about to move into the pilot phase as well. South Korea just came out with a CBDC project that they want to start. India is already testing a digital renminbi, their digital currency, the digital rupee. China is heavily into their CBDC, and they're actually looking to expand it even further. 11 countries have fully launched a digital currency. The ECB is on track to begin its pilot for the digital euro, as I just said. So all of this is coming into effect now. There's actually talk that the Fed may actually be continuing work even further. Right now, they're kind of in flux, waiting to see what Congress is going to do. But there's every expectation that the further we go on, as that executive order stated, the further we go on, the further we're going to tie everything into a CBDC. That's where this administration is headed. That's where it looks like the world is headed. And that's where I think we are headed.